Waitress warns Millionaire about his friend. The next day, a luxury car showed up at her door. What if one small act of honesty could change the course of your life forever? What if a single moment of courage, one decision that seemed insignificant at the time, set off a chain of events leading to an unimaginable reward? Would you take that risk, even if it meant speaking up when no one expected you to? Today's story is about a hardworking waitress, someone who had no wealth, no power, and no reason to interfere. But she saw something that didn't sit right with her. She could have ignored it, gone about her evening, and pretended she never heard a thing. But instead, she chose to do what was right. She spoke up. At first, she thought the millionaire ignored her. Maybe he didn't believe her, or maybe he didn't care. But what happened the next day left her completely speechless. Her entire world changed with one simple, honest warning. Stay with me until the end, because this story has a twist you won't see coming. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Have you ever done something good for someone without expecting anything in return, only to be surprised by life's response? Maybe a stranger paid it forward, or something unexpected came your way. Share your experiences in the comments, because sometimes karma works in the most unexpected ways. It was a bustling evening at La Belle Bistro, an upscale restaurant tucked away in one of the wealthiest districts of the city. The chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the sleek wooden tables, and the faint hum of jazz intertwined, with the distant sound of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. Every night, this place welcomed high-profile guests, business moguls, celebrities, and socialites who lived in a different world than the staff serving them. At the far end of the restaurant, in one of the VIP booths, sat Ethan Sinclair, a self-made millionaire known for his sharp business acumen and effortless charm. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his watch alone worth more than most people made in a year. Across from him sat Daniel Vaughn, his longtime business partner and closest friend. At least, that's what Ethan believed. Sophie, a diligent waitress who had worked at La Belle Bistro for 3 years, carefully maneuvered through the tables, balancing a tray of expensive cocktails. She had seen countless wealthy guests come and go, some polite, others arrogant. But she had learned long ago that in a place like this, the rich and powerful often had secrets. As she neared the booth, she slowed her pace, instinctively catching a shift in the conversation. Daniel's voice was hushed but urgent. His fingers toyed with the rim of his whiskey glass as he leaned in toward Ethan. "Look, Ethan," Daniel murmured, his voice just loud enough for Sophie to hear as she set down their drinks. "You're overthinking things. The missing funds? They're just temporary shifts in the numbers. It's nothing serious. The investors don't need to know." Sophie's hand trembled slightly as she placed the last glass on the table. Missing funds? Investors not knowing? Her heart pounded. She had overheard conversations at this restaurant before. Gossip, stock market tips, scandalous affairs. But this sounded different. This sounded like fraud. She stole a glance at Ethan. Unlike Daniel, who was smooth-talking his way through the conversation, Ethan seemed unfazed, relaxed even. Maybe he really trusted Daniel. Maybe he was used to hearing this kind of talk. Or maybe he was being blind to a betrayal happening right in front of him. As Sophie turned to walk away, her thoughts spiraled. Should she say something? Would it even matter? People like Ethan Sinclair and Daniel Vaughn lived in a world where money ruled, where loyalty was fleeting. What could a waitress possibly say that would make a difference? But deep down, she knew something was wrong. And she had to decide, stay silent and let whatever was happening unfold. Or take a risk and warn Ethan before it was too late? If you were in Sophie's position, would you speak up? Or would you stay out of it knowing it could cost you your job? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes doing the right thing comes at a price. The night was winding down at La Belle Bistro. Most of the tables were emptying, save for a few guests enjoying their final sips of wine, engaged in quiet conversations. The warm glow of the chandeliers reflected against the polished wood floors, creating a serene, almost dreamlike atmosphere. But inside Sophie's mind, there was nothing serene about what she had just heard. As she cleared a nearby table, her thoughts raced. She knew what she had to do, but the consequences terrified her. What if Ethan dismissed her? What if Daniel found out she had been listening and caused trouble for her at work? She had seen how powerful men like him handled people who got in their way. But deep in her gut, she knew if she didn't warn Ethan, she would regret it forever. Taking a steadying breath, She clutched her tray tightly and made her way toward the booth. Ethan sat alone now, his gaze unfocused, staring at the dark red wine swirling in his glass. He seemed lost in thought, unaware that betrayal sat right across from him just minutes ago. Sophie hesitated. This was it. Clearing her throat softly, she said, "Excuse me, Mr. Sinclair?" Ethan looked up, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers. He seemed slightly surprised. Waitresses didn't usually address him unless taking an order. He straightened slightly, giving her his full attention. Yes? Her palms felt sweaty. She glanced around to make sure Daniel wasn't nearby before speaking. I know it's not my place," she began carefully, "but I overheard something earlier. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but I couldn't help but hear what your friend said about misplaced funds." Ethan's expression remained unreadable. He studied her carefully, his gaze unwavering. "Go on." Sophie swallowed hard. "He said the investors wouldn't find out, that you didn't need to worry. It sounded like—" She hesitated, realizing how dangerous this could be. "It sounded like he was hiding something from you." A long silence stretched between them. Ethan leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping against the base of his glass. His face remained composed, but something in his posture had shifted. A tension, a realization. "You're sure that's what you heard?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Sophie nodded. "I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't." Another silence. Then, to her surprise, Ethan's lips curled into something resembling a smirk. But it wasn't amusement. It was something darker. "Interesting," he murmured. Sophie's heart pounded. Was that it? Would he just brush her off? Would she be fired for overstepping? But instead of dismissing her, Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. "Thank you," he said simply. Sophie blinked at the money, unsure of what to do. I wasn't telling you this for a tip, sir." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not a tip. That's a token of appreciation. You've given me something much more valuable than money." She hesitated, then nodded, her chest feeling strangely lighter. Maybe she had done the right thing after all. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder. Did Ethan already suspect Daniel? Or had she just revealed something he never saw coming? If you were Sophie, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes speaking the truth comes with risks. But is it worth it? Sophie's alarm buzzed earlier than usual the next morning. But she hardly needed it. She had barely slept at all. Her conversation with Ethan the previous night kept replaying in her mind. Had she done the right thing? Had she crossed a line? What if he was offended? What if Daniel found out what she had done? Would she lose her job over this? As she slipped into her uniform and tied her hair back, she shook off the doubts. What's done is done. Now, she just had to get through another shift and hope for the best. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when she arrived at Le Bel Bistrot. The moment she stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, she froze. A sleek black Rolls-Royce was parked outside, gleaming under the early morning sun. The kind of car that made people stop and stare, that looked so out of place in front of a place. Like this unless a billionaire was having breakfast inside. Her heart skipped a beat. Her co-workers already inside peeked through the windows whispering excitedly. Something was happening. Before she could step inside, the driver of the Rolls-Royce stepped out, his expression unreadable. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a crisp black suit. Without hesitation, he opened the back door of the car, revealing the last person Sophie expected to see. Ethan Sinclair. She barely had time to register what was happening before Ethan himself stepped out of the car. Gone was the relaxed, wine-swirling businessman from the night before. Today, he looked sharp, focused, unshakable, and he was walking straight toward her. Her throat went dry. "Sophie," he greeted, his deep voice smooth but unreadable. She wiped her palms against her apron, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Sinclair, good morning." He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You have a minute?" Did she have a choice? Sophie nodded hesitantly, and Ethan motioned toward the side of the building, away from prying eyes. As they moved out of sight, her nerves kicked into overdrive. What is happening? Once they were alone, Ethan exhaled, then turned to her. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did last night." Sophie blinked. You looked into it? Ethan gave a slow nod. Let's just say your warning saved me from making a very expensive mistake. His jaw clenched slightly as if holding back frustration. Daniel was stealing from me. Millions. If I hadn't started digging when I did, I might not have caught him in time. A stunned silence stretched between them. Millions? Sophie had suspected something was off, but millions? I don't know what to say, she stammered. Ethan gave a small smirk, though there was no amusement in it. You don't have to say anything. You already did more than most people would have. For a second, Sophie wasn't sure what to do. Had she actually changed the course of something this big? Had she really helped one of the richest men in the city uncover a betrayal that could have cost him everything? Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a key fob. He held it out to her. Sophie frowned. What's that? Ethan's smirk deepened. That car outside? It's yours. The air left her lungs. Excuse me? He placed the key fob into her palm, curling her fingers around it. Call it my way of saying thanks. You saved me more than just money, Sophie. You saved me from making a mistake that could have ruined everything. The least I can do is make sure you never have to take another bus to work again. Sophie's head spun. A car? A luxury car? This couldn't be real. I can't accept this, she said quickly, shaking her head. This is too much. Ethan shrugged. Consider it an investment. People like you, the ones who do the right thing, even when they don't have to, deserve more than what life usually gives them. Sophie looked down at the keys in her hand, her fingers trembling. She had spent years struggling, working endless shifts just to make ends meet. And now, all because she had chosen to speak the truth. Her entire life was about to change. She looked up at Ethan, eyes wide. I don't know how to thank you. He smiled. This time it wasn't the smirk of a businessman, but something softer. You already did. With that, he turned and walked toward his car, leaving Sophie standing there, frozen in disbelief, staring at the gift that had just rewritten her future. Sophie stood motionless in front of the restaurant, still gripping the key fob in her trembling hands. The world around her continued moving. Cars passed by on the busy street. Pedestrians hurried past without a second glance. And inside the bistro, her co-workers whispered excitedly. But for her, time had stopped. A Rolls-Royce, her car? How was this even possible? Just yesterday, she was struggling to make ends meet, saving every penny to afford rent, and now she was holding the keys to a car she never even dreamed of sitting in, let alone owning. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned back to Ethan, who watched her reaction with an amused glint in his eyes. He seemed so calm, as if this wasn't a life-changing moment for her. Mr. Sinclair, I don't know what to say. She shook her head, still in disbelief. This is insane. I can't accept this. Ethan chuckled, placing his hands in his pockets. You already have. He tilted his head toward the luxury car. Go on, take a look inside. Sophie hesitated. A part of her felt like if she touched the car, it would vanish, as if this was just a dream and she'd wake up to the sound of her old alarm clock in her tiny apartment. But something about Ethan's unwavering confidence made her legs move. She slowly approached the Rolls-Royce, every step feeling surreal. The driver, standing patiently by the door, gave her a small nod before opening it for her. Sophie inhaled sharply as she peered inside. The interior was like nothing she had ever seen before. Plush leather seats, an elegant dashboard, the faintest scent of new car freshness lingering in the air. Her fingers brushed over the steering wheel. It felt unreal. She turned back to Ethan, still unable to comprehend. Why me? She finally asked. I was just doing the right thing. I wasn't expecting anything in return. Ethan's smirk softened into something more genuine. That's exactly why. He took a step closer, his voice lowering slightly. Most people wouldn't have said a thing. You did. You risked your job, risked getting involved in something that wasn't your problem. But you still chose honesty. That's rare. And when I see someone like that, I invest in them. Sophie swallowed the lump forming in her throat. No one had ever believed in her like this before. No one had ever looked at her and seen potential, let alone rewarded her for simply being herself. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed. Not just by the car, but by the weight of what this moment meant. It wasn't about luxury, it was about recognition, about someone telling her that she mattered. So what now? she asked hesitantly, still clutching the keys. Ethan smiled. That's up to you, but something tells me this is only the beginning. Sophie took a deep breath, looking down at the keys again. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem so uncertain. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to struggle forever. Maybe this was the start of something greater. And as she stood there, in front of the most extravagant gift she had ever received, one thought crossed her mind. Sometimes, one small act of courage can open doors you never even knew existed. Sophie sat in the driver's seat of the Rolls-Royce, her fingers gripping the wheel as reality slowly settled in. The quiet hum of the engine was barely audible. The dashboard illuminated with elegant displays she didn't yet understand. The seats, made of the finest leather, molded to her body as if welcoming her into a world she had never belonged to before. This was real. This was hers. Outside, Ethan leaned against the car, watching her reaction with a knowing expression. He had seen this kind of disbelief before. People, frozen in that moment when their lives changed forever. But Sophie? She was different. He could see the way she struggled to accept it, as if waiting for someone to pull it all away and tell her it was just a joke. She let out a shaky breath and stepped out of the car, staring at him. I don't understand, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. This is too much. Ethan gave her a small smile, tilting his head slightly. No, Sophie. This is exactly what you deserve. He folded his arms, his tone turning serious. People like you, the ones who do the right thing even when they don't have to, they don't get enough credit. I just decided to change that. Sophie swallowed, glancing back at the luxury car, the reflection of the city lights dancing across its polished surface. It was overwhelming. All her life, she had worked tirelessly for barely enough. And now, she owned something worth more than everything she had ever earned combined. Her hands tightened around the key fob. I don't know how to thank you. Ethan's expression softened. You already did. You were honest when most people wouldn't have been. He glanced at his watch, then met her gaze once more. Use this as a reminder that good things come to those who aren't afraid to do what's right. Sophie exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't even know how to drive something this nice. She laughed, though it was laced with nervous energy. Ethan smirked. Then I guess you better learn fast. A short silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of what had just happened. Sophie wasn't just taking home a car. She was taking home proof that her life was changing, that she mattered. For the first time in years, she felt seen, valued, and as Ethan gave her one final nod. Before stepping into his own vehicle and driving off, Sophie realized something. This wasn't just about a car. This was the start of something new, a future she never thought possible. The sun had barely begun to rise the next morning when Sophie sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the keys resting on her kitchen counter. She had placed them there the night before, too overwhelmed to even process what had happened. A Rolls-Royce, a gift, a life-changing moment. It still didn't feel real. She traced the sleek metallic key fob with her fingers, her mind spinning with questions. What did this mean for her? Could she really accept something so extravagant? Would people think she had done something to deserve it? Beyond simply telling the truth? The self-doubt crept in, the kind that had followed her for most of her life. Did she really deserve this? A sudden knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Heart pounding, she quickly rose to her feet and peeked through the peephole. It was her landlord. Her stomach twisted. Not now. She knew what this was about. She was a few days late on rent. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Morning, Sophie, he said, arms crossed. Hate to bring this up, but your rent is overdue again. I can give you until the end of the week, but after that... Sophie nodded quickly. I know. I promise I'll have it soon. The landlord studied her for a moment, then sighed. I hope so. I'd hate to see you struggle, but I've got bills to pay too. As he walked away, Sophie closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. That was the moment she knew. This car, this gift, wasn't just about luxury. It was an opportunity. She wasn't about to waste it. Later that day, Sophie made her way back to the restaurant. But this time she wasn't walking. She was driving. The moment she slid into the Rolls-Royce's leather seats and gripped the wheel, something inside her shifted. She had never thought she would sit behind the wheel of a car like this, much less own one. As she pulled up to La Belle Bistro, her coworkers stared, some whispering, others outright gawking. She had spent years in the background, just another waitress blending into the scenery. But today, she was impossible to ignore. Her best friend and coworker, Lisa, practically sprinted over, eyes wide. "Sophie, please tell me you just borrowed this and didn't rob a bank." Sophie laughed, shaking her head. "Nope, it's mine." Lisa's jaw dropped. "How?" Sophie hesitated before answering. "Because I told the truth." Lisa frowned. "What do you mean?" Sophie explained everything. The conversation she overheard, the risk she took by warning Ethan, and the unexpected reward that followed. By the time she finished, Lisa looked at her with pure admiration. "Sophie, do you realize what this means?" Lisa said, gripping her shoulders. "This isn't just about a car. It means someone with real power saw your worth. That doesn't happen every day." Sophie swallowed hard, realization settling deep in her chest. Lisa was right. She had spent her life feeling like she was just trying to keep her head above water. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally standing on solid ground. That night, Sophie sat in the driver's seat again, staring at the city lights reflecting in the windshield. She could go anywhere now. She had choices she never had before. And for the first time, she felt in control of her future. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. "Ethan, hope you're enjoying the car. But more importantly, I hope you realize this isn't just a gift. It's a challenge. Don't stop here. Go after what you deserve." Sophie smiled, a sense of determination lighting up inside her. This wasn't just about the car. This was about what she would do with it. And she was ready to find out. Days had passed since Sophie had received the Rolls-Royce, yet every time she stepped outside her apartment and saw the car parked by the curb, she still had to remind herself it was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a mistake. It was hers. But Sophie wasn't the same woman she had been a week ago. Something inside her had shifted. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who had been seen, someone who had been rewarded for doing the right thing, and now she wanted to make something of it. She sat at the small wooden table in her apartment, staring at a blank notebook in front of her. It was time to plan her next move. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "This isn't just a gift. It's a challenge. Don't stop here. Go after what you deserve." She tapped the pen against the paper, her thoughts racing. For so long, she had only focused on surviving, paying rent, getting through the next shift. But now she had an opportunity to think bigger, to dream. Her first thought was to sell the car. It was worth a fortune. With the money, she could clear her debts, move into a better apartment, maybe even go back to school. She had always wanted to study business. Ironically, the very thing Ethan had built his empire on. But then another thought struck her. Why not use this opportunity to do something more? Something for herself. Something lasting. Just as she was about to jot down ideas, her phone buzzed on the table. She frowned, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through. "Sophie, it's Ethan." Her heart skipped a beat. "Oh, hi." She hadn't expected to hear from him again. "I was wondering if you've thought about what you'll do next," he said, cutting straight to the point. Sophie exhaled, glancing at the notebook. "I have, actually. I want to do something with this. More than just spending the money or living comfortably. I want to invest in myself." There was a short pause before Ethan spoke again, this time with approval in his voice. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Ethan chuckled. "Because I have an offer for you." "How would you like a job?" She nearly dropped the phone. "A job? I'm looking for someone I can trust. Someone who understands honesty, hard work, and who doesn't shy away from the truth. I need a personal assistant, someone to help oversee a new project I'm working on." Sophie was speechless. Was this really happening? "Of course," Ethan continued. "It's entirely up to you. But from what I've seen, I think you'd be great at it." Sophie swallowed, her mind reeling. A job, working for Ethan Sinclair, the same man whose trust she had earned with one act of honesty. This wasn't just an opportunity. This was the start of something she had never dared to imagine for herself. "When do I start?" she finally asked, a slow smile forming on her lips. Ethan laughed. "That's the spirit. I'll have my team send you the details. As the call ended, Sophie sat back in her chair, stunned. 1 week ago, she was just a waitress struggling to get by. Today, she was about to walk into a whole new life. She glanced at the notebook again, but this time she knew exactly what to write. Step 1, believe I deserve this. The next morning, Sophie awoke feeling different. Not because she had a luxury car sitting outside her apartment, or because she had just accepted a job offer from one of the wealthiest men in the city. She felt different because for the first time in her life, she felt in control. She took a deep breath, standing in front of the mirror, smoothing down the crisp white blouse she had bought for her first day. A fresh start, a new beginning. As she stepped outside, she caught a glimpse of the Rolls-Royce, a symbol of how far she had come in just a matter of days. But instead of driving it to work, she had made another decision. The night before, she had called a dealership and arranged for it to be sold. Ethan had given her a gift, but he had also given her a lesson. It wasn't about the car. It was about what she did with the opportunity. With the money she received from the sale, she had cleared all her debts, secured a comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood, and started saving for something even bigger, her future. The first day of the rest of her life. As Sophie arrived at Ethan's corporate office, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The towering glass building loomed over the city skyline, bustling with professionals who had worked their entire careers to get here. And yet here she was. She stepped inside, the cool air conditioning and scent of fresh coffee filling the air. A receptionist greeted her warmly. "Miss Carter, Mr. Sinclair is expecting you." The words still felt surreal. "Mr. Sinclair is expecting you." As she was led through the sleek, modern hallways, her heart pounded in her chest. Then the doors to his office swung open, revealing Ethan Sinclair standing by the window, staring out over the city. He turned when he heard her footsteps, flashing that same confident smirk. "You made it." Sophie nodded, standing tall. "I did." He gestured toward the seat across from his desk. "Have a seat, Sophie. Let's talk about your future." And just like that, she realized, this wasn't just a job. This was a chance to build something, a chance to prove to herself that she was capable of so much, more than she had ever believed. For years, she had served others, watching from the sidelines as life passed her by. But now she was stepping forward. As she settled into the chair, she couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. Sophie stepped out of Ethan Sinclair's office with a newfound sense of purpose. As she walked down the hallway, past the towering glass windows overlooking the city, she realized she had entered a world that once seemed unreachable. But she was here now, and she wasn't going to waste this opportunity. The office hummed with energy, executives moving with purpose, assistants juggling phone calls, interns rushing with stacks of files. She had once been just a bystander in places like this, serving food to people who barely noticed her. Now, she had a seat at the table. She exited the building, stepping out onto the sidewalk where the city's heartbeat pulsed around her. The sun was warm on her skin, the sky stretched out in endless blue. Everything felt possible. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Ethan. "Ethan, first day done. Now go celebrate." "You've earned it." Sophie smiled. She hadn't just earned it, she had created it. Instead of heading straight home, she found herself driving to a quiet cafe she used to visit when she needed to think. The kind of place where she had once dreamed of a better life, but never truly believed she'd get one. She ordered her usual, a simple cup of coffee, no frills, just warmth. As she sat by the window, she pulled out a notebook and started writing. Her dreams, her goals, her plans. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just working to survive. She was working towards something bigger. She thought back to the moment she overheard that conversation in the restaurant. The moment she made the decision to speak up. She never could have predicted how much that single act would change her life. And then she thought about the future. This wasn't the end of her story. This was just the beginning. With a deep breath, she closed the notebook, took one last sip of coffee, and stood up. It was time to build the life she had always deserved. Sophie's story is proof that one moment of courage can change everything. She didn't just warn Ethan, she changed the course of her own future. Because doing the right thing always comes back in ways we least expect. What do you think? Would you have taken Ethan's offer? Have you ever had a single decision transform your life? Let me know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that honesty and courage always pay off in the end.